Every year, thousands of Hindus are drawn up into the mountains by the age-old pilgrimage to the source of the river Ganges. The source lies deep in the glaciers of the High Himalayas on the very borders of Tibet. To many Hindus, it is simply the most sacred place on earth. I've always wanted to travel there, both because of its sheer remoteness and because it seems to lie at the very heart of the mystery of Hinduism. At first sight, Hardwar looks like any other small Indian town. But what draws travellers here is its position on the banks of the Ganges, just as the river gushes out of the mountains. It is the essential starting point of any journey to the source.
Shambho Shankara Namah Shiva.
By bathing in the river, the pilgrims here believe that they can cleanse themselves of a lifetime of sins. The Hindu scriptures are agreed that the Ganges is both river and goddess, and so a tirtha, a crossing place where you can move from the world of men to the world of gods, as easily as you might step across a stream. But if Hindus believe in sacred space, they also believe in pools of sacred time, that there is a moment every 12 years when if you bathe in the river, your prayers will be more quickly heard and readily fulfilled than at any other point in time or space. It is as if a window momentarily clicks open in the heavens, allowing direct access to the divine. And I have come at the precise moment when, once every 12 years, this happens, and without any formal publicity or propaganda, the Ganges draws no less than 10 million pilgrims in a festival called the Kumbh Mela, the largest religious gathering on earth. The pilgrims are made up of simple villagers, sophisticated city dwellers, and above all, the holy men, the sadhus, who descend on Hardwar for a festival that makes Glastonbury look like a picnic in the park. I've seen the sadhus in my travels all over India and found them slightly menacing figures with their dreadlocked hair and wild, often unpredictable behaviour. But it's only seeing them now, arriving in such numbers for this great festival, it makes me realise quite how many of them there are, and how many different forms they take. Some are freelance wanderers moving from town to town. Others live ordered monastic lives in ashrams, dividing their day according to strict rules and performing severe penances. Most fascinating of all are the naked Naga sadhus, the ash-smeared warrior ascetics who throughout Indian history have formed the shock troops of Hinduism. It's the promise of directly accessing the gods which has drawn them and literally millions of ordinary Hindus to the banks of the Ganges to bathe and to worship. Overnight, a small market town the size of Saffron Walden is transformed into a heaving metropolis, larger than New York. Some of these pilgrims will, like me, be attempting the difficult path up to the source of this extraordinary river. The sheer size of the Kumbh Mela may be astonishing, but what I personally find more remarkable is its almost unbelievable antiquity. For the tradition of bathing in the Ganges here at Hardwar predates Islam, Christianity, and even the worship of the gods of ancient Rome. The ritual you see today at the Kumbh is described in the Rig Veda, India's oldest sacred text, written when both the pyramids and Stonehenge were still in use. Yet while Isis and Zeus are dead and forgotten, the river goddess Ganges is now more revered than ever. The goddess is seen as a mother, Ganga Ma, who comforts her children and is tangible, approachable, and all-accepting, the essence of compassion in liquid form. Nowhere is this seen more clearly than in the case of the untouchables. This is the darker side of Hinduism. The untouchables here told me that in all Hardwar there was only one priest prepared to perform ceremonies for them, and that because of this he had been ostracized by his colleagues. But the river goddess, they said, was different. She turned no one away. In Hardwar, the untouchables, or Dalits, the oppressed as they prefer to be called, have their own lodging house, as, astonishingly, many other places still refuse to take them in. How easy is it to get the blessing of the goddess Ganges?
It's easier to get the blessings of Mother Ganga than of any other god. The reason is that she lets everyone bathe in her, and no one else can stop you from going to her. That's why we can get her blessings.
If caste is one aspect of Hinduism that most Westerners find difficult to understand, then this temple shows another potential stumbling block: modern Hinduism at its most noisy and confusing. The great Hindu scriptures may be works of quiet philosophical subtlety, but as this temple shows, popular Hindu devotion today is often neither quiet nor subtle, and can be deeply muddling for a Westerner to understand. As Hinduism has no founder, no single holy book, nor any central authority, it refuses to be pinned down. With every generalization you make about it, the exact opposite is often equally true. This pilgrimage is, for me, a chance to bring into focus this most elusive and fluid of all religions. At the heart of this journey lie two deities, the gentle river goddess Ganga and her wild and tempestuous consort, the great god Shiva. The region through which we planned to pass was once known as Kedarkand, the land of Shiva. Indeed, it is believed that the very slopes of the Himalayas are Shiva's matted locks, and that when the goddess Ganga came down from heaven to earth, Shiva caught and tamed her in his ascetic stresses. The heat, Sakti, produced by their union, so the priests will tell you, ensures the preservation and regeneration of the universe. Shiva is in many ways the wild man of the Hindu pantheon, the dope-smoking loner who lives meditating on a peak in the remotest Himalayas, outside society and its constraints. The pandas of Hardwar have for centuries been registering every pilgrim who's ever set off to the source of the Ganges. The records of these priests are remarkably comprehensive.
London? जो हमारा हिंदुस्तानी बसा हुआ है बर्मिंघम लंदन ये लिखा इंग्लैंड बर्मिंघम अच्छा मेरा गांव नॉर्थ बेरिक बेरिक स्कॉटलैंड में नॉर्थ बेरिक भाई साहब ऋषिकेश की बस कहाँ से जाएगा सीधे ऋषिकेश की बस ठीक है आया भाई ऋषिकेश भाई साहब
The road to the source winds for 100 miles through the foothills of the Himalayas, following the river Ganges as it meanders its way through the valleys. Rishikesh was where the Beatles came to learn the sitar from Ravi Shankar. Those were the days when dope was cheap and karma was king. Everyone who's anyone was a dharma bum, prepared to risk fleas and dysentery on the way to enlightenment, or at least Kathmandu. But times change. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who hosted the Beatles, now runs a business school that has not been seen in Rishikesh for 20 years. Even so, the town is still full of ashrams, and Rishikesh continues to attract hundreds of Westerners who are not too cynical to shave their heads and pay up, in dollars, for a course in transcendental meditation or the mysteries of Tantra. In the Divine Life Society, a pillar lists 20 instructions for achieving enlightenment. Do not overload the stomach, sleep separately, and avoid narcotics. No easy sex and drugs here. Above all, stick to your routine. Be good, do good. If only it were that easy. Yet for all the frauds who filled the garages of their ashrams with Rolls Royces by parting Westerners from their material goods, there are still in the caves around Rishikesh many genuine and deeply impressive ascetics who have given up everything to seek God through silence, solitude and meditation. As I was swimming, another holy man walked past, very different from my friend in the cave. Babaji was a Naga sadhu, one of the warrior holy men who now, as in the days of the Buddha, go either naked or with just a loincloth and very few worldly goods. Although in this case, Babaji did have one very unexpected possession.
Babaji, tell me about your motorbike.
What do you want to know about this?
Well, you have a hi-fi system somewhere. Where is it?
Yeah, here, look.
Hidden away in here?
Yeah. I have fixed just recently in Kumbh Mela. I was thinking long time to fix, but this time I fix.
And where do the cassettes go?
Cassettes here.
You have? What kind of music do you like, Babaji?
I like most religious. So I have most cassette religious.
Can we hear?
Yeah, possible.
Babaji, where are the speakers?
Speaker is here. Look, one this side, one that side.
You've got stereo.
Yeah.
It's a stereo motorbike. I find myself making the next stage of the journey on the back of Babaji's motorbike, which, while exciting, poses one tricky question. If you're riding pillion with a naked holy man, where exactly are you supposed to put your hands?
Ding dong, ding dong. Oh baby, sing a song. Sing a song. Ding dong. Oh baby, sing a song.
And Babaji, you can drive your motorbike after smoking the stuff?
Yes.
No problem?
No problem.
Safely?
Yeah.
We're not going to end up under a bus.
No problem.
Did you see in the...
But I drive slowly, not so much fast.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I need good road.
Yeah. For a sannyasi, is it important to keep traveling?
For sannyasi,
For sannyasi, for sadhu, for Baba?
yes. Then he's Baba, you know, if he's traveling. But really is very hard.
To keep traveling?
No, traveling is the way of Baba.
Right.
But we have many rules for everything. Rules, you know. So it's
That's India for you.
yeah.
Obviously, a sadhu's life can be very difficult. You've got
Especially Naga Baba.
no clothes,
They are
penances.
more difficult and very hard and very angry also. And everybody is afraid in India from Naga Babas.
In case they attack them.
Attack because they are very strong. Otherwise, nobody is making one Naga Baba.
Acha. But Babaji, is it important to suffer, to have blisters, to have all the discomforts of traveling?
Yes.
So why do you have the motorbike?
This is also one way of devotee.
Right.
Some people even going by laying. They rolling.
I didn't think I was getting a straight answer from Babaji, who went into great detail about the different forms of asceticism practiced by Naga sadhus, without ever explaining why riding a motorbike could be a form of penance. But by the time I'd spent the rest of the afternoon on the back of his Enfield Bullet, I was beginning to understand why. As Babaji and I rattle saddle sore over the potholes, we see a constant stream of sadhus walking the ancient pilgrimage route for the many weeks it takes to reach the source. There are also the pilgrims' buses, which, despite many warnings to the contrary and wrecks of past accidents, tend to treat the single-track road as if it were the Ganges Grand Prix. Nonetheless, we managed to arrive safely at the British hill station of Mussoorie. The Victorians liked to come up to the hills for the summer, indeed rather thought they'd invented the idea. It was a convenient journey from Delhi, and just as Simla became the Raj's summer capital of government, so Mussoorie became its summer capital of pleasure. In the old Savoy Hotel, the ghosts still linger. Queen Mary stayed here and sent a carved Indian walking stick back to Edward VII. In the 20s, the ballroom was constantly full, as the Raj danced out its small hours in a riot of high society and frenzied high-altitude adultery. One contemporary guest remembered that when the morning bell sounded, the pious would say their prayers, while the impious got back into their own beds. As Kipling wrote, Jack's own Jill went up the hill to Mussoorie and Chakrata. Jack remained and died in the plains, and Jill remarried soon after. Here I met Bill Aitken, a remarkable Scottish writer who has lived in these hills for the past 40 years.
The amusing thing about the empire attitude that we started everything, we started the idea of hill stations where we estivated and cut the summer heat. But in actual fact, it was the Hindu gods who started this notion of wintering in the lower regions and spending their summer in the snowy heights. They long before the Alpine Club was founded, the Hindu gods had cottoned on to the idea that this is a great place to be in the hot weather.
We're so used to the very Indianness and sort of exoticism of seeing Hindus bathing in rivers. But as you point out in your book, it's not a very different idea at all from the Western idea of baptism. Is that so?
The moment you travel, you suddenly discover the world is the same everywhere. The ideas, the depths of idea changes, but basically there's no difference.
So Bill, what have I got ahead of me up the Ganges?
Many people set off to the source of the Ganga, but unless the goddess pulls you, kenshos you, you do not arrive. This is the absolute universal belief and people's experience, that unless you're intended to arrive, you will not.
The hill stations were about as far as most Victorians went. The idea of investigating the sacred geography of the Hindus had little appeal for the young bucks of the Mussoorie circuit. But this was not necessarily so for an earlier generation of travellers, several of whom lost their lives in the search for the source of the Ganges. The Scottish artist and explorer James Bailey Fraser was, in 1815, the first Westerner ever to penetrate to this then semi-mythical destination. As the area was in the hands of the Gurkhas of Nepal, the bitter enemies of the East India Company, Fraser was forced to travel incognito in the guise of a Hindu pilgrim. After weeks in the heat and dust of the North Indian plains, the flowering rhododendrons, the damp incense smell of the leaf mould, and the sweet resinous scent of the conifers transported Fraser straight back to his Inverness-shire home. As he trekked up the Ganges at the same time of year as us, he wrote in his logbook, "We now bound China and live in a climate very like Scotland. We can go and lie down under the oak, birch, larch or elm, or gather wild strawberries and raspberries as at home. Asia is lost to our imaginations." As he trekked through the High Himalayas, or the Great Himalaya as he called it, the artist made thousands of sketches which he later turned into these lithographs. It is astonishing to see how little the area has changed in nearly 200 years. We were reaching a turning point in the journey. After 3 weeks, we were now at 12,000 feet and approaching the snow line. Ahead lay the high peaks, so before leaving the last of the foothills, I decided to rest a few days in the village of Trilogy Narayan, said to be the site of the marriage of Shiva to the goddess Parvati. According to legend, so many gods gathered for the wedding celebrations that the top end of India began to sink into the ground with the weight, and several deities had to be dispatched to the south to re-establish the balance. Their marriage flame is now said to have been alight for Triyugi, or 3 epochs, hence the name of the village. While Trilogy Narayan is famous throughout India as a central site in the mythology of Shiva, the villagers themselves look not just to Shiva, but to an almost numberless pantheon of local sprites and godlings. The villagers take care to propitiate both Shiva and their particular village goddess, Achari Devi. Shiva controls the continuation of the wider cosmos, but it is Achari Devi, they believe, who regulates the daily life of the village. When you first come across it, it can seem as if it is this multiplicity of different gods which is the biggest single divide between Hinduism and the other great religions of the world. But it is not as foreign as it seems, because the more you talk to Hindus, the more you find that many of them believe that there is in reality only one God, of whom the different gods and goddesses are but forms, that they are like different lenses with which to perceive ultimate reality. In that sense, it's only a short jump away from the Christian idea of the Trinity. It's a simple idea, but to me it certainly does help bring the apparent anarchy of Hinduism into sharp and immediate focus. While Shiva and the great gods are thought to be almost unimaginably remote, the local goddess plays an active part in village life through her oracle. Twice a week, the oracle holds a surgery when she's entered and possessed by the goddess, and through whom she offers advice, prophecies and cures to the villagers.
ये न्योता आया तुम्हारे मेरे की ले पिक्चरों में डोलते हैं कहना है कि मैं पिक्चरों में जा रहे हूँ मेरी बलि कौन दे रहे हैं अष्ट बलि खाने वाले हूँ कोई हानि नहीं होगा अच्छा रहोगे.
Can the goddess offer us any advice on getting to the source of the Ganges at Gamuk?
देवी मैं वो गंगा का गोमुख जान लगी छो.
देखो तुम्हारा यहाँ पर कोई हानि बिगड़नी नहीं होगा मेरी इच्छा पूरी होगा तुम्हारा.
At the time, I was convinced from her tone that it was all going terribly wrong, and that the oracle was condemning me to a major bus crash, followed by eternal hellfire.
मेरी साथ में 25 वीर है कोई कहीं जाने वाले है कोई कहीं जाने.
But later, when her thick Garhwali accent was translated for me, it turned out that she was in fact telling us that not only would we reach the source, but that I would safely return to the Himalayas in the future. However, there was a sting in the tail.
Well, her performance just put us all in the right dilemma, because in the course of her predictions, the oracle, as well as saying all sorts of nice things about my family life and so on, demanded an 8-animal sacrifice, an Asta Boli, which was going to cost us 15,000 rupees, or around £250, which is the average income of some of the hillmen up here. On the face of it, of course, there's outright extortion, and you can argue that she's just after our cash. But interestingly, none of the crew, and particularly me, was really quite willing to risk the curse. The only exception was Nandu, our sound recordist, who, significantly enough, is the only practicing Hindu among us.
Having negotiated a compromise and left a small offering to appease the goddess, I headed on up the hill, knowing that at the top in Gauri Kund there awaited a set of hot springs and the nearest thing to a decent bath I get in 3 weeks of sweaty trekking. The hot baths at Gauri Kund were built by divine appointment and are said to be a particular favourite of Gauri, the wife of Shiva, after whom they were named. It's true there was no sign of her the afternoon I was there, but bathing in her place was a Tamil professor who swam up and introduced himself as the president of the Madras Wordsworth Society.
In it, the beautiful experience which is not an experience, which is the absolute one which cannot be caught by the mind, which cannot be caught by the psyche, which cannot be caught by the body or by any known instruments, because it doesn't speak of the object, it speaks of the subject. And all of us are the subjects, and therefore the subject to experience something which is very difficult, and the word experience doesn't cover it, because therefore you will have to introduce a new word instead of exput it. It is imperience and not experience. Taking place within you, because you are that. There is no God other than you. What is inside you is that God. You must discover it.
But that sounds more like...
See, in every individual there is a Christ hidden and there is a devil that is there. It is for you to invoke the Christ and suppress the devil.
But this sounds more like Vedanta than Wordsworth.
This is Vedanta. Wordsworth is the greatest Vedantist.
Yes?
He lived in the Lake District. And all his time he was only in tune with nature. And worshipping nature is not pagan worship. It is worshipping the beautiful force that is behind nature, the phenomenal forces behind nature. It is not the tree that is important. It is the force that flows through the tree. As Chelli says in that beautiful
The
crowd.
professor seemed like an unstoppable force of Wordsworthian nature himself. But finally, I got a word in edgeways.
I have the hope the spring will come and make it come up.
So do you mean we've come all the way 16,000 miles to Kedarnath and we should just have gone to the Lake District?
Yes. I have not gone to the Lake District, but I am through. If I close my eyes, I remember everything of Wordsworth, right from his childhood, his boyhood days, the entire...
By now, the river has turned into a mountain torrent, and the tarmac road has given way to a winding goat path, impassable even by jeep. Here, everyone has to start walking, unless they can afford a horse or a porter.
This wonderful road is like a great river of Indian humanity. Every caste from every corner of the country is here. You've got simple villagers, moneylenders, literate holy men, urban sophisticates from the north and south, all rubbing shoulders together like something out of a modern Indian Canterbury Tales. The rich go up on ponies or palanquins or even doolies, which are like kind of rucksacks strapped to deck chairs. But the vast majority of poor pilgrims have no option but to walk.
प्रभु को पाने के लिए ही भजन करते हैं, मस्त हैं और भगवान दर्शन देते रहते हैं.
I consider this to be a religious duty, and that this is the right way to serve God and attain salvation. I see God everywhere.
So aren't you at all concerned what's happened to your wife in your absence? Whether she's ill or upset? Don't you miss family life? Did you miss your family?
नहीं आती है जी.
No, I don't miss them. There is no point in remembering or missing things which are past and gone. We should look forward to what is yet to come. When you are progressing on a road, you don't have to think about the events that have occurred in the past. You just have to think about what is lying ahead.
पीछे का रास्ता तो पीछे निकल रहा है. आगे आने वाला रास्ता आएगा. और क्या?
But you have reminded me of my family. That's the miracle of it.
यही माया है. हाँ.
The climb is long and grueling as the path corkscrews relentlessly uphill for 5,000 feet, through a valley cut by one of the Ganges' major tributaries. The air is thin, and by late afternoon we find ourselves trudging through thick snow. I find it very hard work, but am put to shame by the other pilgrims. Some of them are barefoot, others wrapped only in plastic sheeting. Most have never seen snow before, and few have ever experienced a night at this altitude, or indeed have any idea what to expect when they arrive. This is where the pilgrims are all being drawn, the home of the most powerful of all the gods, Lord Shiva. The great temple of Kedarnath. It is the most important stopping point on the way to the source. West, we're used to religions that put their emphasis on scriptures, the written word, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah. But what I find so refreshing about Hinduism is that it's such a wonderfully visual religion. The final climax of Hindu worship is to have darshan, to actually see the divine image. When I talk to the pilgrims here and ask them why they've come, the overwhelming majority say they're coming for this reason, to do darshan, to meet the eyes of God. It is perhaps for this reason that the images of most Hindu gods are shown with huge eyes. The gaze of the god meets the eyes of the worshipper, and it is in this exchange of vision that lies the very heart of Hindu worship. Anyone brought up with the relatively unemotional church services of the West cannot help but be profoundly struck by these intense scenes of religious ecstasy.
It's all the more moving when you consider that the pilgrims, many of whom are well into their 70s, have just walked 30 kilometres steeply uphill, and many are now preparing to spend a night out in the open in sub-zero temperatures, many with no more than a homespun wrap to keep them warm.
As well as the pilgrims who flock up here for the night, Kedarnath has a more permanent population of sadhus, most of whom are followers of Shiva. For Shiva is the aloof Himalayan ascetic, disconcerting and unpredictable, who lives meditating in the wilderness of the snows, focused inward in meditation. These mountains are his domain, and like him, the sadhus who trek up here are consciously turning their back on society and its rules, in an effort to find moksha, enlightenment, in the clear air and crystal silence of the mountains.
Maharaj,
when did you take up sannyas?
I took up sannyas when I was 10 years old.
10? Why?
This life, this ocean of life, I wanted to run away from it all, and when I was running, I happened to come into contact with a saint, an enlightened soul, and that is why I took up sannyas.
Many of the sadhus have taken vows of silence which can last for decades. This man has taken a vow to remain standing for 12 years. He has already done 7 of them. He sleeps standing up, supported by a swing. Astonishingly, this is not even the first time he has done it. As a young man, he did precisely the same for 8 years. He sees this as an attempt to master his body and its demands, and so, as he puts it, to gain the self-confidence that helps you muster the courage to approach God. In his face, one can see the almost unimaginable pain and determination it must take to keep to such a path. It's the next stage in the pilgrimage that separates the real devotees from what Hindus sometimes call dongi sadhus, hollow holy men. For from Kedarnath you carry on towards the final source of the Ganges by walking the ancient yatra or pilgrimage route across some of the highest ridges in the world. Apart from a few foresters and shepherds, no one lives on these high passes. Here, it is said, Shiva can sometimes be stumbled across in the form of a goat herd. It's very wild country, and only the most serious sadhus would even dream of coming up here. After walking for several days through the high meadows, you find yourself in the very middle of the Himalayas, miles from any road. It is as if you have entered a kind of Jack and the Beanstalk world of indeterminate date, place, or period. The old Yatra route winds its way across the hills. After nearly 100 kilometers, it arrives at Gangotri, the last staging post on the journey. When a temple was first built here some 2,000 years ago, Gangotri was actually the source of the Ganges. But since then, the glacier which feeds the river has retreated some 20 miles up the valley, and the source is now a day-and-a-half's trek from the temple. It's another measure of the sheer antiquity of this extraordinary religion, as if Hinduism is a faith whose history is to be recorded not in human, but in geological time.
उसने कहा कि भाई यहाँ से मैं हटा दे पर दूसरी गांव में चले जाए। फिर बारसों में 2-3 औरतें मतलब वहाँ भी नाचना शुरू कर दिया उन्होंने। फिर वहाँ भी हो गया तो बारसों वाले फिर हमारे गांव में आए अब मुझे बुलाने के लिए क्योंकि
On the last night of the pilgrimage, there is a real air of expectancy and anticipation as the Yatris gather around the campfire. We listen to a story being told about an evil spirit which possesses an entire village before being heroically exorcised by the storyteller himself. The final stage of the trek is through an almost symbolic wasteland, an inhospitable high-altitude moonscape, 12,000 feet high, burningly hot by day, icily cold by night, as one approaches the ring of high Himalayan mountains which guard the source. At dawn the following morning, I finally arrive, making my way through a bitter wind to the vast glacier at the end of the valley, where the river emerges fully formed from a crystal amphitheatre of solid ice. You don't have to be a Hindu to feel that this desolate, windswept wasteland at the source of the Ganges is one of the most extraordinary and suggestive places on the face of the earth. It is, as nowhere else, a tirtha, or sacred ford, a place for crossing over, where the divine touches on the mundane and the human.
पुष्पं च धूपं तथा दीपं देवदयानिधे पशुपते कल्पितं रघुनाथं.
This then is where it all begins. No man-made shrine or structure breaks the solitude. No priest intervenes between God and man. Here the pilgrim can perform the ultimate darshan, to worship not an image, but the living goddess as she breaks free from her prison of ice on her journey from heaven to earth. Only when you see such a sight in the pre-dawn glimmer of a sub-zero Himalayan morning can you really grasp how easy it is to deify such a river. Jai Ganga Ma.
जाति चंपक बिल्व पत्र रचितं पुष्पं च धूपं तथा दीपं देवदयानिधे पशुपते हृत्कल्पितं गृह्यताम्. सौवर्णेन रत्नखण्डरचिते पात्रे घृतं पायसम् भक्ष्यं पञ्चविधं पयोदधियुतं रम्भाफलं पानकम् शाकानां यतं जलं रुचिकरं कर्पूरखण्डोज्ज्वलम् ताम्बूलं मनसा मया विरचितं भक्त्या प्रभो स्वीकुरु.
Survive in an age of religious fundamentalism. Delhi is one of the most ancient cities in the world, a graveyard of dynasties. Century after century, invaders have swept down into the rich plains of India from Central Asia, and time again, they have burnt the city of Delhi, only to re-establish their capital on the same site. One reason for the city's strange longevity, so its people believe, is that Delhi is a city of Djinns. When the world was new and God made mankind from clay, it is said that he made another race like us in all things, but fashioned from fire. The Djinns were spirits, invisible to the naked eye. However often their city might be consigned to the flames, the Djinns loved Delhi and could never bear to see it ruined or deserted. Under their influence, the city has been continually reincarnated. I lived in Delhi for 5 years, and over that time I grew to love the city. Now I've come back to go in search of her roots, to try to seek out, so to speak, Delhi's guardian Djinns. But to this day, every house, every street corner is still haunted by them. You cannot see them, but if you concentrate, you might be able to feel them, to hear their whisperings, or even to sense their warm breath in your face. When I lived in Delhi, I was always driven around by my friend Balvinder Singh, a prince among the city's taxi drivers. On Delhi's roads, as in so many other aspects of Indian life, might is right. But Balvinder is from a warrior caste, and like his ancestors, he's keen to show that he's afraid of nothing.
Mr. William, why not coming visit Libya?
She's in London.
London?
No, London.
What time coming?
She's staying there now.
Huh?
Staying there now with the children.
He disdains such cowardly acts as looking in his wing mirrors or using his indicators. His ambassadors, his chariot, his klaxon, his sword. Weaving into the oncoming traffic, playing chicken with the other taxis. Balvinder Singh is a Raja of the road.
Balvinder, have you ever crashed?
Yes. Yes, sir. No problem, no.
No problem. How many times have you crashed?
No problem.
How many times?
Today?
No, altogether.
Altogether I got too much times. Maybe night time, all night, without not sleeping.
But crashing?
Yes.
As Balvinder drives me round, I'm reminded of the wonderful way in which the remains of Delhi's past still intrude on its present. Hidden behind the trees of Delhi's broad avenues are endless relics of the city's previous incarnations. Even the New Delhi of the British is not new at all. It is a groaning necropolis, peppered by the tombs and ruins of the past. For this is not one city, but many. As each city came to be abandoned to the surrounding jungle, another was simply rebuilt nearby, in a different location. They say there are 7 old cities of Delhi, and that the latest is merely the 8th, and possibly that, too, will soon be abandoned for another. But it is the city's past as the capital of a series of Muslim empires that particularly haunts every aspect of life here. However hard the planners have tried to ignore them, the old Islamic ruins still intrude, distracting joggers in the municipal gardens from their daily exercise and obscuring the fairways of the golf course. At the heart of the history of this city, a theme which runs through 1,000 years of invasions and rebuildings, lies the story of the confrontation of two great religions, Hinduism and Islam. Out of the meeting of these two very different civilizations, there emerged a unique cultural fusion, which reached its climax in the civilization of the great Mughals, Delhi's Golden Age. But this century, as pluralism has been replaced by a savage polarization, a tapestry of incredible beauty and complexity, built up over a period of 1,000 years, has been almost irretrievably pulled apart. The history of that conflict is still hotly disputed, and to help understand it better, I went back to one of the very first cities of Delhi, a set of ruins that has been almost completely forgotten. So, this is where it all began. On these walls, the walls of the fortress of Lalkot, the first act in the Hindu-Muslim conflict was played out, a conflict which of course is still going on to the present day. In 1192, an army of Muslim Turks from what is now southern Afghanistan lined up on that ridge over there. The previous year, they'd been beaten back with heavy casualties, but came back for a second attempt with a much, much larger army. The walls were breached, Delhi's Hindu Raja was beheaded, and his fortress was burnt to the ground. It remains in ruins with just camel thorn, goat herds, and peacocks today. The Hindus may have thought that this was just a stray Muslim raiding party from Central Asia, but it was in fact the beginning of a process that was to last for centuries. This mosque was built from the shattered masonry of 67 of Delhi's Hindu temples. The pillars still stand with their former Hindu deities visible but defaced. This is not the work of 20th century vandals, but of the very first Muslim sultans. And beside the mosque was raised a massive victory column, the Qutb Minar. Ostensibly it was a minaret for the call to prayer, but given that not even the most voluble and enthusiastic imam would have been heard from the top, it was clearly as much a triumphant statement that Islamic rule had come to India to stay. For all that these events took place 1,000 years ago, and the Qutb is now one of India's favourite tourist attractions, this early Muslim attitude has left a lasting legacy of trauma and resentment. So much so that in the folk memory of Hindus, the subsequent years of fruitful coexistence are often completely forgotten.
Where their mouth is. They'll go to Davos, they'll talk about India, they'll come back here and do fuck all, you know.
My first night back, I'm invited to a party. All the usual suspects are there: journos, publishers, ad men and fashion designers. This is what they call Delhi's cocktail circuit.
2 o'clock in the morning. That's all right, you had to go for a 9 o'clock meeting.
He's come from India today.
Will it be available in the market that you can buy?
With Vani, I'll become a lefty, and with a lefty, I'll become a righty.
No, but
I am essentially only a devil's advocate.
Oh, what a blast. I mean, 1.5 hours of shit. It's rare that you get this opportunity where the guy on the other left fucking...
Many of the guests are friends from my journalist days. But as I sat listening, I began to notice a change, a distinct hardening of attitudes.
Achu was a great person. Yeah, why do you say that?
What was?
Is.
Well, I mean, you know.
Would you like to bring her here instead of Sonia Gandhi?
Let's be honest. This is a Hindu country.
Who says?
I say.
I'm a Hindu, but I don't believe it's a Hindu country.
I'm not.
I'm a practicing Hindu, but I don't believe.
I'm not a practicing Hindu.
What are you?
Political.
Anti-Muslim.
Political Hindu. Pakistanis are something, you have as your neighbors. You don't want to be one of them.
Why not?
We must be friends with them. But they're not one of us. We are not estranged brothers. Look, what is the problem? We are not talking. What is the problem with Muslims?
I'm asking you.
That's what I need to know.
The greatest change since I lived in India has been the rise of a right-wing Hindu nationalist party, the BJP.
Ravinderji, C98.
C98. Okay, sir.
Is this all politicians' housing?
I went with Bavinder to find one of the most vocal of these Hindu nationalists, Prem Sharma, the Central Secretary of the World Hindu Council, a man at the heart of the Hindu revivalist movement.
This one, the Sharma house.
This one?
This one, the Sharma house.
Okay.
It's there.
Namaskar. Mr. Sharma. Thank you for giving us time.
No, yes, no problem. How are you? All fine? No problem?
Nice to meet you.
Okay, please come along.
Where should we go?
Yes, come along. She is my wife.
Hello.
Mrs. Krishna Sharma.
Namaskar.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Tike, welcome Tike.
She's my wife, Krishna Sharma. Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Very good. Please sit down somewhere. Please sit down.
We've just been to see the Qutb Minar, and we thought it was a very beautiful example of Muslim architecture.
It is not at all a Muslim monument. Actually, its original name is Vishnu Dhwaj. It has been destroyed by Islamic persons. You must have seen the entire area was surrounded by Hindu temples.
But it's built in an entirely Islamic style.
No. Oh, during Islamic period, they wanted that Hindus should feel covered. They should know their place. All right, then what to do? Tell them no temple can be there. They demolished to insult us. The days are gone.
But in the this is ancient history. In the modern period, you can't go around destroying mosques and knocking down the monuments of other religions.
We cannot forget our forefathers. Suppose someone comes 200 years, he kills my father and hang his skeleton on the wall. And every day he will show me, hey, Mr. Sharma, come along. This is the skeleton of your father, bloody hell, we killed him in 200 years. Telling us like that. And now the day has come when we have taken the revenge. That's all. That's the happiest day of the world. Our old blot, slur on the part of this nation, it is finished. In the true sense, history is being written again, rewrite of history.
You are doing this now?
Not myself, one of the organizations over here. So they have started to bring the facts before the entire world, because actually we were under the reign of Islam for 700 years. They were writing about themselves. Then again we were under 150 years under the British. They were also managing in their own way. For the last 50 years, Congress was there, but they were having the appeasement policy towards Muslims. Again they were after them. Now we are writing for the last 12 years, rewrite of history of this country. Okay?
So you're going to propagate a history in schools that has the Taj Mahal and the Qutb Minar
yes.
built by Hindus?
Say after 10 years, 20 years, but I am not a spokesman of Bharatiya Janata Party. I'll tell you, as soon as the Hindus will come in their own full strength, with their own glory, the history will be rewritten and the facts will be brought before the world.
According to the BJP, Delhi's 700 years of Muslim government was an unbroken period of oppression and conflict with the Hindus. But the place Bavinder is driving me to is living proof that this was simply not the case.
Okay, I'll be 1 hour.
Okay.
Okay? Where are you going to go off to?
I'm going to the whiskey.
Whiskey bag?
Oh, drinking whiskey.
Okay. You come back in 1 hour.
Okay.
Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah.
The first sultans may have forcibly imposed their will on the abject Hindu population, but the conquerors also brought with them the more mystical aspect of Islam, known as Sufism. Sufism has always been deeply imbued with the ideals of tolerance and acceptance, and so found a natural home in India, which has always been known for precisely those qualities.
The chat? No. Biryani.
I'm heading for one of my favourite places in Delhi, the tomb of Nizamuddin, a 13th century Sufi mystic who withdrew from the world and preached a simple message of love and compassion. His remarkable shrine lies hidden away down an ever-narrowing vortex of lanes and alleyways in the very heart of Delhi. Overhead are the kabutabas, the pigeon flyers, calling their birds with the same cries they have used for 1,000 years. Nizamuddin promised his followers that if they loosened their ties with the world, they could purge their souls of worries and move towards direct experience of God. What was important, maintained Nizamuddin, was not the external ritual of the mosque or the Hindu temple, but simply to understand that divinity can best be reached through the gateway of the human heart. We all have paradise within us, said the saint, if we know where to look. In this way, the Sufis succeeded for the first time in bringing together Muslim and Hindu in a new movement which spanned the gulf separating the two very different religions. One ordered and austere, the other profoundly fluid and colourful. For Sufism, with its emphasis on the individual's search for union with God, has always resembled the mystical aspects of Hinduism. To this day, the shrine still attracts almost as many Hindu, Sikh and Christian pilgrims as it does Muslims. It was an approach that would be far more long-lasting and productive than the bigotry of the very first sultans.
Do you often come to Muslim shrines?
Yes.
Often comes. To particularly Sufi dargahs?
Yes.
Why? For what reason?
For better health, better prosperous, and better life.
Better life, yeah. But do the Muslims like you coming to a Muslim shrine when you are Hindu? Is that a problem?
No problem.
No problem.
We never have a problem with these dargahs. We often goes to the different dargahs and we never face any problem.
So when you hear politicians saying that Hindu and Muslim are not brothers, does that make you angry?
It is totally wrong. We don't have any problem from Muslims, and Muslims also have no problem with Hindus.
And do you think that the dargahs and Sufism helps the people come together?
Yes. We believe in God only. God is one only in the whole world.
The Sufis believe strongly in the power of music and poetry to move devotees towards spiritual ecstasy and hence towards greater love of God. Here in the shrine's courtyard, the poet Amir Khusro created this, the Qawwali, the mesmerizing and profoundly mystical love song of the Indian Sufi. At the time, what was most remarkable about the Qawwali was that its lyrics were not in the Persian of the Muslim immigrants, but in the local Hindi vernacular, and that its music mixed the best of the Indian tradition with new ideas brought to Hindustan from Central Asia by the Muslims. This was the beginning of something altogether new. In the centuries that followed, almost every aspect of the life and culture of Delhi came to reflect that fusion and Delhi's position on the fault line between the world of Islam and the world of the Hindus. Most remarkably of all, the architecture of Delhi came to reconcile the indigenous style of the Hindus with the arch and dome of Islam to produce a style more lovely and original than either. This is the tomb of Humayun, one of the early Mughal emperors. The Mughals were the last and greatest of the Muslim invaders to sweep down from Central Asia, and with them came Delhi's Golden Age. The Mughals established a dynasty that was to rule Delhi for centuries. As they became more secure in their power, their love of fine architecture and intricate design could blossom in the Indian climate. The Mughals brought with them the Persian idea of creating a paradise on earth, and in their pleasure palaces, like these west of Delhi, they came as close as any civilization to achieving it. In an atmosphere of peace and tolerance, Sufism could flourish. Confronted by a dazzling array of rival religions in their new empire, the Mughals organized open-air meetings so that teachers of different traditions could debate what their faith had in common. Following these symposia, many Sufis came to regard the Hindu scriptures as divinely inspired. In the peaceful and tolerant atmosphere of the Mughal Empire, as the Hindu and Mughal aristocracy began to intermarry, and as the dialogue between the two rival religions reached its climax, the two cultures successfully fused together and flowered into a civilization of breathtaking beauty and perfection.
My God, look at this, 5 years old. Hi. He was 16 when I last saw you, Fajid. Have a seat. Please, Doctor, sit back here. Please, take a seat here. Down here. Where's the How are you, Doctor?
Oh, really, I'm very happy. You get a good surprise. Where did you come?
4 days ago?
Yeah.
I went to see a family who, for me, represent all that is best about Old Delhi's culture.
Literally, MPhil is in Persian.
Yeah, my MPhil is in Persian.
You know, she's working on Dara Shuko, so she's bound to learn Persian.
Perfect subject
Yeah.
for a Sufi family.
Yeah.
The head of that family, Dr. Jaffrey, is a Persian scholar whose ancestors once taught Persian at the Red Fort. When I lived in Delhi, I used to come here to drink endless cups of tea and hear about life during the Mughal period. Dr. Jaffrey is proud to describe himself as a Sufi or dervish.
I am myself a dervish. Dunya mein hu, dunya ka talabgar nahi hu. I am in this world, but I am not desirous of this world. I am detached to this world. And were teaching Persian to princes.
Really? Literally?
Yeah. And,
To this day, he lives in one of the last inhabited Mughal buildings in Old Delhi, which has been a college for 300 years. He knows as well as anyone the folk tales of the city, and particularly the old stories about Delhi's Djinns. So they still wander the streets of Delhi?
Yeah, they look like human beings. They talk in like human beings, but their voice is somewhat heavy.
Deep.
Yeah. And it is saying, where there is a room vacant, the Djinns abide there, take abode there. And look like villagers. Their dress is not proper, and you can recognize only if their shadow is not falling on the ground.
They have no shadow?
Yeah.
Near Dr. Jaffrey's college is the Jama Masjid or Friday Mosque, the symbol of the Islamic presence in the city, from where the call to prayer has rung out over Delhi for hundreds of years, although the acoustic feedback is a comparatively recent addition. It would be wrong to assume that all Muslims were tolerant of the beliefs of their Hindu subjects by the time it was built in the 17th century. Then as now, there were some more fundamentalist proponents of narrow Islamic orthodoxy. But the Sufi tradition had so gained in strength that it became a distinguishing mark of the culture of Delhi. Prince Darashuko, whose father built both this and the Red Fort nearby, wrote a comparative study of Hinduism and Islam which emphasized the compatibility of the two faiths and the common source of their divine revelations. His book was called The Mingling of Two Oceans, and I went back with Dr. Jaffrey to the palaces of the Red Fort in which he lived. Doctor, I always think that Darashuko sounds the most attractive.
Yeah, he was, no doubt. If he would have become king, the Mughal Empire could survive even today.
Why?
Because he wanted to amalgamate two cultures, and this was the only
Hinduism and
Islam, and this is not a new idea. Even at the time of Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, the saints had realized the amalgamation of two cultures is the only way to survive in this country.
And how did he try to amalgamate them?
By combining Hindu ideas with Islam, and if he would have become king, this world would have become paradise, as you see written here.
What does it say?
If there is paradise on the earth, here it is, here it is, here it is.
That's what in Persian?
This is Persian, but very near to our Urdu and Hindi languages. No,
so people can understand it?
Can understand, yes. No problem.
I spent all day wandering around the Red Fort on my own. If this was once paradise, it no longer is. The fountains, which once carried water and rose petals through the palace buildings, are empty, and the gardens are bare. It's now a melancholy place. The emperor would have greeted his subjects each morning from this ornamental balcony. Now the waterways he would have gazed out on have been filled in with a slum, and a motorway thunders past. The dream of Mughal thinkers such as Darashuko for a culture that fused the best of both Muslim and Hindu civilization seems to have evaporated. The Mughals brought images of flowers from their beloved Kashmir and carved them intricately into white marble. These have survived. The idea of harmony between Muslim and Hindu seems to have receded over the centuries since, as bitterness and hatred have taken over. By the 19th century, the Mughal Empire had collapsed, and the Delhi they had built, the sixth city, had in its turn grown poor and decayed. But right up to the coming of the British, the last of India's invaders, Hindus and Muslims continued to live side by side. I love the old city of the Mughals, with its winding alleys and crumbling traditions, but it's impossible to walk in its streets without being overcome with sadness at the city's decline. The same old walls that now form rickety shops and warehouses once supported sprawling courtyard houses known as havelis. You can see it for yourself. The slum was once a city of palaces.
Then you shouldn't drink and drive. You have to finish.
Too much drinking, too much fucking. No.
Govinda drove me around the old city, only slightly worse for wear after what had clearly been a lively night on the town. He wanted to take me to a partridge fight in one of the obscure back streets behind the great mosque. Hindus and Muslims have always come together to celebrate traditional Delhi pastimes like these. But during the Raj, serious tensions started to emerge. In 1883, the city witnessed its first ever communal riot as Hindus and Muslims attacked each other in the streets. By the time of partition in 1947, what was left of the composite culture was torn apart in a welter of bitterness and bloodletting. Over 1 million people lost their lives and 12 million became refugees. Delhi became the capital of a new Hindu-dominated India as flames rose across the skyline of the old city. Pigeon breeding is one of the oldest of Delhi pastimes. The breeders fly their pigeons from the roofs and try to lure the birds of other flocks to join their own. I talked to one breeder, Raizuddin, who remembered the days of partition, when many of the old Muslim inhabitants left for the new state of Pakistan.
Everybody was everybody else's enemy. There was a lot of violence, and people left due to the murder and the mayhem. The Muslims started to keep to their own areas, and the Hindus began to do the same. Anyone who crossed out of their own area used to be killed or beaten up and robbed. It was very disturbing, so many people went away to Pakistan.
What happened to the pigeons?
During the fighting, a lot of houses were set on fire. We only realized how many because the pigeons which I'd raised and sold came back here as their own houses had been burnt. They were very distressed when they flew back. Many had burnt legs and burnt wings.
This is an RSS youth rally, deliberately marching through these Muslim ghettos of the old city. The RSS is the organisation that has spearheaded Hindu nationalism since partition, and many in the BJP, including its leader, have been drawn from its ranks. It's easy to laugh at them as they drill in their Boy Scout shorts and bamboo swagger sticks, but their founding philosophy is anything but comical. For the RSS took direct inspiration from the fascist movements of Europe when considering how to deal with India's Muslims.
Your RSS guru wrote, I think in We or Our Nationhood Defined, he said that he admired the German Aryans for wiping out their Semitic race and said that Indian Hindus should do the same to the Semitic race of Muslims.
I read this. Yes, I tell you. Hitler was doing all right because what I have read, the blood of Germans were sucked by these Jews at that time.
But do you feel the same thing should happen to the Indian Muslims?
No, it should not happen. It will not happen. The day they realize they are within this country, they love this country, they feel it as a motherland, fatherland, a sacred land, nothing will happen. I don't think they will come.
But if they don't do that, what will you say to them?
What?
If they don't recognize it as their motherland?
No, we'll teach them. They will be all right.
In 1992, Hindu nationalists like Mr. Sharma, seen here on the right, campaigned for the forcible demolition of the mosque at Ayodhya. They claimed that the Mughal Emperor Babur had deliberately built the mosque over the birthplace of the Hindu god Ram. Riots quickly spread across India, and I'd heard that some of the worst violence in Delhi took place in a district called Seelampur.
The Seelampur was very bad trouble in 1992.
Yes.
Many killed?
Some, not many.
By Shiv Sena?
Shiv Sena and other people and
RSS.
I decided to try to find some of the people at the receiving end of the violence, a small pocket of Muslims in a largely Hindu community.
Oh, भैया सुभाष पार्क कहाँ पड़ेगा जनता कॉलोनी?
भाई साहब कहाँ कुछ दंगा हुआ था? पता नहीं उधर। ये? क्या दंगा बता रहे कहाँ पे हुआ था? अदाब अदाब। आपसे 5 मिनट बात कर सकते हैं? जूती उतारने?
What happened here after the destruction of the mosque in Ayodhya?
In our area, there was peace at first, but suddenly things heated up and a riot started.
Outsiders came and started throwing stones and petrol bombs and chanting Hindu slogans. They had the police with them. After the huts caught fire, some people tried to put them out, but the police shot at them. This woman's husband was shot. We tried to resist them. All our children and men who were captured were beaten. One of the wives is sitting here. She was pregnant. The police hit her with a rifle butt and the child died.
Are you worried about the future?
The worry we have is that tomorrow someone could attack us. We don't trust them. Even now, after 6 or 7 years, we don't trust them. They can still attack us and kill us any time.
It's in ordinary neighbourhoods like these that the battle for the heart of India will be fought out. Living side by side with over 800 million Hindus are 100 million Muslims. The prospect of extended violent conflict between them hardly bears thinking about. Driving back that night, Bavinda reminded me that it's not just the Hindu fundamentalists who've indulged in communal violence, nor just the Muslims who have been its target. He told me of his own experiences in an earlier upsurge, this time targeted at his own Sikh community. They had heard that mobs were sweeping the city. Driving in convoy, they came to a roadblock where a burning truck had been placed across the road. Bavinda saw his young cousins dragged from a taxi, kerosene poured on their bodies and set alight. It was, he said, an image that still rose before him in his nightmares.
We've met people in East Delhi who were Muslims who were very badly attacked by Hindu rioters after the destruction of the mosque at Ayodhya. And they had kerosene poured over their brothers and set alight. What do you say when you hear these atrocities?
Actually, this could be avoided had the Muslims accepted that Babur was an invader and Lord Rama was their forefathers. It could not happen. Basic things, they all take the invaders as their forefathers, whereas they are born here, they are our flesh and...
But you cannot justify murdering people, pouring kerosene over them because they happen to hold a view.
There is nothing. It has happened on both sides. While there is a, you see, fight, it goes on this and that side.
But in Bombay, you know, a handful of Hindus were hurt. How many? Was it 5,000 Muslims were burnt alive?
We don't advocate and we don't justify the murder of anybody. But when there is a reaction, nobody can check. But if you take up the entire, you see, history of 50 years, Muslims are the first to start with all this quarrel. It is in their blood.
Mr. Sharma, are you hoping that you can reabsorb into greater India, as you put it, the neighboring countries around you?
I tell you, when we say undivided, Akhand Hindustan, means I believe all those 62 districts which are with Pakistan or with Bangladesh, they are ours. If the wall of Berlin can go, why not this, our own motherland can be united again? There are only two ways in this world. First thing is prayer. If it does not, the prayer does not work, then come along. The way you have taken that land from us, the same way it will be taken back. That's all.
By force?
Yes. Whatsoever the means. It may be any means.
Nuclear weapons?
It may be any means on this earth. So because I believe that is my motherland. It has been snatched from our hands. That must come back. That must come back. That is Akhanda Bharat.
So you wipe out Pakistan?
What? So because they have also wiped out us. It's a time. It's a time. It's a time. They should also realize that they belong to one culture.
And if you have to wipe every last Pakistani
Whatever
out?
Come what may, they have also tried to wipe us out in the same way. Tit for tat.
So just kill them all?
Whatsoever were the reasons. But we want our country back, all the land back, 62 districts back, and our tricolor will fly up to Peshawar.
When I used to live in Delhi and wanted to get away from the noise and confusion of the modern city, I'd come here. These ruins are all that is left of one of the early cities of Delhi, Tughlaqabad, once one of the most magnificent capitals in Asia, now completely deserted. It's exactly the sort of ruin that Dr. Jaffrey would say was home to Delhi's Djinns. From these massive walls, a tiny Muslim elite tyrannized a largely Hindu population. To one side, enclosed in its own wall, lies the tomb of the city's founder, defended by massive bastions, as if attempting to keep even the angel of death at bay. Delhi's population has always been so incredibly mixed and diverse that those who try and impose the rule of one religion on another have never succeeded. Delhi's early Muslim sultans tried to impose a particularly monolithic version of Islam on the city, and within a century these fortresses were ruined and deserted. One can only hope that a similar fate awaits the monuments of the modern Hindu nationalist movement, as 1,000 years later they try and impose an equally monolithic version of Hinduism on the same city. For what does survive, despite the violence and turbulence of Delhi's history, is the popularity of Sufism, which 1,000 years after its arrival in India still attracts vast numbers of people of every caste, creed and religion. After all I've seen of bigotry and growing communal distrust over the last few weeks, the intermixing of religious traditions at this shrine is all the more remarkable. In these faces, one can see the expression of the old Indian belief that just as there are many paths up a mountain, so there are many different paths that lead to God. The Sufi ethic, with its rejection of external ritual and its emphasis on the individual's internal journey towards the divine, still provides a glimmer of light in what one can only feel to be a fast darkening sky. While sultans and empires have come and gone, what has always survived is the tolerance of the people of Delhi. Under the influence of its Djinns, Delhi has always risen again, however violent and self-destructive its rulers. For while it is always easy to be apocalyptic about India, the country has a surprising capacity to prove its doomsayers wrong. In a temple in southern India, the dancers act out a remarkable story. They tell the legend of the death of a holy man, a saint who came from the Middle East, bringing a new and exotic religion to India: Christianity. This journey begins thousands of miles from India in the deserts of the East Mediterranean. By the early 7th century, the Christian Roman Empire was beginning to crumble under a wave of attacks. The great classical cities slowly fell into decay. As their libraries and universities were burnt down or destroyed, many of the most important manuscripts were preserved in a remote monastery in the desert of the Sinai Peninsula to try to save them from the shadows of the approaching Dark Ages. The monastery is called St. Catherine's. The great walls of St. Catherine's and its sheer isolation in the rocky desert preserved it from attack for centuries. The monks were able to accumulate one of the greatest collections of icons and illuminated manuscripts in the entire Christian world. For over 1,000 years, many of their treasures remained hidden. When the first European travellers began arriving at the monastery in the 19th century, they found a library of unmatched richness, containing lost works by great classical authors and the oldest extant copy of the New Testament. But I had come to see perhaps the strangest discovery of all. a previously unknown early Christian text which had long been suppressed as heretical by the Western Church. The manuscript was entitled The Acts of St. Thomas.
Apa pote ine?
Είναι από τον 5ο αιώνα.
5th century.
5th century. 1500 χρόνια βιβλίο.
The Acts of Thomas.
1500 years old.
The manuscript tells the forgotten story of a remarkable missionary journey made all the way to India by one of Jesus' 12 apostles, St. Thomas. It's a story which immediately fascinated me, not least because, unlike most such pious legends, it just could, quite conceivably, be true. From the early church to the modern day, St. Thomas has always had a powerful hold on the religious imagination.
That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion.
He is remembered as Doubting Thomas, the story of how he, alone of the 12 apostles, refused to believe in the resurrection until he'd felt Christ's wounds, has been endlessly retold by each successive generation. In his questioning, he could almost be a patron saint for our own uncertain 20th century.
Consider this hint of the century.
But the Acts of Thomas suggest that there is far more to his story than one understandable act of doubt. And to follow that story, I went to Jerusalem. While Jerusalem is still one of the most beautiful cities in the world, I've always found it one of the most upsetting. As you wander the cobbled streets of the old city, it's impossible not to notice the daily humiliations suffered by the indigenous Palestinians, a constant reminder of the unhealed wound at the heart of the Middle East. For the apostles in the days immediately after the crucifixion, Jerusalem must have been a terrifying place. Neither the Roman occupiers nor the religious authorities would have had much sympathy for the followers of what they saw as a dead revolutionary and heretic. What would it have been like in the very first days of the early church here in Jerusalem?
I'd imagine that the few disciples of Jesus would have been in a chaotic state. Remember, after the resurrection, they finally realized that Jesus was alive as he had promised. I mean, they hadn't really believed what he was saying in his lifetime. And that meant a tremendous surge of energy and courage. And immediately they began to spread out. We had a church in Damascus within 18 months of the resurrection. And the project then was to go from Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria to the ends of the world.
What would that early church that St. Thomas knew have been like?
I doubt if we would have recognized it, because to us they would have looked and acted exactly as Jews did. They went to pray in the temple, presumably they offered sacrifice in the temple. The difference was that they confessed Jesus as the Lord. They believed that he was the Messiah, that he had inaugurated the last age of human history. But that was all that separated them from their environment.
And St. Thomas's role in that?
I imagine that he would have been one of those that went to the east, so we lost sight of him. You see, others went as far as Antioch. That was the bridgehead to the west. But we have forgotten in the west all the great missionaries who went to the east.
Today, the Palestinian Christians, who with reason can claim descent from the very first Christian communities, have all but disappeared, and their churches are empty. Under Israeli rule, they find themselves second-class citizens in their own land. Those that remain could be flown out in just 9 jumbo jets. Only the clergy are left in the Cathedral of St. James, dedicated to the memory of the first head of the church in Jerusalem. That early church would have followed a very particular form of Christianity, one probably unrecognizable to the Western churches today. Yet this was the faith of the apostles who actually knew Jesus in the flesh. And if the manuscript I saw in St. Catherine's was to be believed, it was these forgotten traditions that St. Thomas may have taken with him to the east. There seemed to be only one way, finally, to judge the likelihood of Thomas's legendary journey: to follow in his footsteps, to walk the same roads, to see wherever possible what he had seen, and to discover if any trace of the saint lay at journey's end. As he crossed over the deserts on the way out of Judea, Thomas would have been leaving his homeland forever, where, according to the Acts, he had begun life as a simple carpenter, like Jesus himself. I followed his route in a Palestinian minibus, which managed the journey rather faster than in his day. Then caravans would have plodded their way down past the Dead Sea, and at the end of a week of hard desert travel, have arrived at the Gulf of Aqaba. The modern resort of Eilat is not one of the more resonant ancient sites in the Middle East. And although you'd never guess it today, this was once the ancient Israelites' port to the outer world, called at Zan Giba. Now, of course, it's more like the Middle East's answer to Ibiza. One of the main stumbling blocks to belief in St. Thomas's journey has always been the sheer geographical problems that seem to be involved. Yet it is easy to forget that from the Red Sea, it is a direct route down the Persian Gulf to India. So if Thomas really did go to the subcontinent, his point of departure could well have been from here. On the face of it, the story told in the Acts of Thomas might seem absurd. Could there really be any genuine historical basis for the legend of Thomas's difficult journey, 3,000 miles across the Arabian Sea, to a destination that then must have seemed semi-mythical? The answer to those questions could only lie in India itself. St. Thomas would have sailed across the Arabian Sea and then followed the trade winds as they took his ship down the length of the Indian coast. It would have been a journey out of the familiar territory and customs of the Eastern Roman Empire to the utterly foreign land of the Indian subcontinent with its very different Hindu civilization. Moreover, its green fertility could not have been a more stark contrast to the desiccated hills of the Judean desert. Finally, the ship would have found its way here, into what was once the main port of the Malabar coast, the great deep-water inlet of Cranganore, known to the ancients as Muziris. To a simple carpenter from rural Palestine, it must have been like arriving on a foreign planet. Thomas stepped ashore, he was not to know that he would spend the next 20 years here, preaching the gospel. According to the Acts, as he entered the city, he heard the sound of pipes and organs and much singing. For there were once docks and quaysides on this site, warehouses and the palaces of rich merchants. Here too was a synagogue for the Jews and a temple of Augustus for the expatriate Roman community. It was here, perhaps on the site of these crumbling walls, that St. Thomas is supposed to have erected the first church in India. It's frankly amazing how little is left of Cranganore now. A few old walls and towers, the laterite eroded to the texture of old peachstone and choked with vines and creepers. But 2,000 years ago, this is one of the biggest ports in the entire world. All the spices of Malabar were brought here, oils from the Himalayas, slave girls from northern India, a lot of the silk trade from Central Asia. And out here, 300 triremes from the Red Sea to buy it. But now, all that's left, just a few old walls. At first, I could see little evidence that this was the place of his arrival, apart from the St. Thomas canteen and cool bar. But close by, there was a small fishing village. The fishermen are mostly Christian, and I met with two, called rather unexpectedly, Peter and Thomas.
Where is Thomas?
My name's Thomas. I'm Peter, and I work as a fisherman on the high seas. St. Thomas was a disciple of Jesus Christ. He came and preached the teaching of Jesus to the local Hindus.
When you read in the Gospels about Peter and James being fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, does it all sound very familiar?
Of course it's familiar, and we feel that connection. We feel the connection all the way from Peter. We're proud to be fishermen, and we believe in that connection. It is with that faith that we go out to sea. When the sea gets rough, it's God's name we call. The sea is very unpredictable. You never know whether you'll come back to shore. We pray to God, of course, and to Jesus Christ. We pray to the saints too. In a storm, to be honest, you don't really have time to think. You just call on everyone. But Christ is the real power. Everyone else is secondary to him, even St. Thomas. They were, after all, his disciples. When we're in need, we pray first to Jesus and only then to St. Thomas. Christ's apostles underwent great hardship to take his word to people right around the world. Here in Kerala, St. Thomas taught people the word of God.
According to the fishermen, St. Thomas is supposed to have travelled through the coastal towns and villages of this part of India, today called Kerala. As he went, he began erecting crosses, converting people with the aid of miracles, and building churches. To scholars in the West, the question of St. Thomas's journey to India is one of academic debate, if not outright disbelief. But, as I soon learnt in India, it's a tradition which has not only been preserved, but jealously guarded by people who still proudly call themselves the Christians of St. Thomas. It is in fact more than a legend. It is an article of faith which underpins their whole identity and their place in Indian society. As I took in the intensity of the devotion, I noticed a strange fresco above the doorway of the church. It was a conventional Last Judgment scene, but there were many strange idiosyncrasies. The devil was made to resemble the Hindu goddess Kali. A Catholic priest was being tortured, and there was a demon in the form of Vishnu. Clearly, if St. Thomas did bring Christianity here, it has survived in a uniquely Indian form. Tradition and a body of legends are one thing, but what hard evidence is there to show that it would have been possible for Thomas to make this epic journey from 1st century Roman Palestine?
These are the Roman ones, look.
I went to the local museum to meet up with my friend, the Australian scholar of the spice trade, Dr. Jack Turner.
Very clear script, some of them. That's right. Look at these keys.
It's a fine set he's got there.
Who have you got there?
Well, here I have Augustus, and here I have Nero.
Mean-looking guy.
Yes, this is a very interesting coin because this is one of the earliest coins that they've found in India from the Roman connection. So this would be...
What's the period?
Well, roughly datable to about the beginning of this millennium, the time of Christ, the birth of Christ.
Did you get much before that, or no?
No, so it was about the time of Christ that a Greek actually discovered the way of sailing to India by a direct route from the Yemen, and he found that if he hopped on the back of the winter monsoon at the right time of year, he could sail to this coast in about 40 days.
40 days?
40 days direct.
Door to door?
That's right, across the ocean. But it required a huge leap of faith to sail out onto the blue water into the open ocean.
Rather than taking the coast?
Without hugging along the coast, which would take months.
And what were they buying with this?
Mostly pepper. and after pepper, some of the other spices, exotic products such as cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves, which came from further east. But this was the spice coast par excellence. This is where all the pepper in the world was produced until the modern era.
Pepper's the most boring of all spices. I mean, just ordinary pepper.
Not for a Roman, no. It
was hot stuff, was it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when...
it was the Tabasco of its day.
Yes, in fact, much later after this, Rome was sacked by the Goths, King Alaric, and instead of gold, he demanded payment in pepper.
But people became rich from this. This was the...
Oh, fabulously rich, yes.
And what did the dates go up to? When's Nero?
Well, Nero's in the middle of the 1st century AD, which is the period which coincides with the most intense trade, and this is when we find most of these Roman coins. So they start in the reign of Augustus and they build up under Nero in the middle of the 1st century AD. We get a...
It's exactly the time St. Thomas would have come if he had come.
That's right. In fact, this is the period when it would have been easiest for St. Thomas to come to India. In fact, it would have been easier to sail to India and safer and probably cheaper than at any time for the next 1,500 years.
Wow.
Until Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope.
So perfect timing.
Absolutely perfect timing.
So the idea isn't absurd from a historical point of view that St. Thomas came to India. I mean, he could have come easily.
That's right. It doesn't prove anything, but it was certainly possible.
I was still surprised that boats could then have survived the monsoon passage from the Middle East. The evidence lay along the shoreline nearby. Half hidden in the trees were the rotting hulls of great whales of boats, many of which were designed for precisely such a journey. The skills of the Malabar boat builders were prized for centuries by the medieval Arab spice traders, who so valued the combination of Indian craftsmanship and locally available teak that they had many of their finest boats made here. This boatyard still builds traditional ships for Arab merchants, although only just. It was on the point of closing when I went with Jack to have a look at what may well be one of the last boats they ever make. This must be a heck of a lot bigger than anything available in St. Thomas's time, though, yeah?
Well, not necessarily. The Greeks had ships of approximately this size.
Big ship, though, isn't it? This is a big ship.
A big ship, that's right. Well, the Greeks had ships up to about 600 tons, which is about this, I would guess. And in fact, they had to be of this size for two reasons. Firstly, to survive the oceanic crossing from India to the Arabian Peninsula, which involves some quite big seas. And secondly, to take...
During the monsoon?
That's right. And to fit the cargo in. Quite a bulky cargo on the way out of horses and...
You've had down there?
Horses and slaves, mostly, on the outward journey, and on the way back they would have had spices and cottons.
They actually sold slaves to India?
That's right. From the Balkans.
Really? And horses?
Horses from Arabia, that's right. Very much in demand here.
So if St. Thomas came on this voyage, he'd be down in that hold with a whole lot of slaves and horses?
40 days and 40 nights, very biblical, down in the hold. Very noxious. It's a mind-boggling stuff on the pitching seas with the
horses scared out of their mind,
sweat swilling around, horses crying. It must have been disgusting. This is like one vast lavatory. It would have been like a sewer. The horses and the sweat and the smell.
Just like economy.
Absolutely like economy class. Yes, on a particularly nasty long-haul flight.
So you brought slaves and you shipped back spice.
That's right.
The spice trade not only provided St. Thomas with the means of getting to India, it also provided him with a purpose. The lure of spice meant that there was a thriving expatriate community of Romans and Jews he could try to convert. In the bazaars, one can still see the old method of bargaining being used. The price is agreed by the squeezing of fingers under a towel, so that no one else can hold you to the same price. Spice is still the lifeblood of the markets of Kerala, and it is still heavily dominated by the St. Thomas Christians. At the big spice exchange, tempers get a little peppery as the traders bargain in the future of cardamom, nutmeg and ginger. Kerala and its main port Cochin have built their fortune on the spices Arab and European gourmets wanted on their tables. For Thomas, this would have been a perfectly logical place to come. Western academics have always been decidedly sceptical about the St. Thomas legend, treating it as little more than pious legend. But the more you examine the evidence, the more you're irresistibly drawn to the conclusion that whether or not St. Thomas did visit India, he certainly could have done. And if there's no final documentary proof to clinch the argument, there is at least a very good reason for its absence. For the entire historical records of the St. Thomas Christians were burnt, not by Muslims or by Hindus, but by a newly arrived power who were themselves, ironically enough, Christian. For the calm world of the Indian Ocean was changed forever when in 1498 Vasco da Gama discovered the sea route to the Indies. Soon the Portuguese were shelling the coastal cities of Kerala in an attempt to seize control of the spice trade. The Portuguese Inquisition immediately set about destroying the St. Thomas churches and building their own. For as far as the Portuguese were concerned, the Indian Christians were heretics, who among other things believed in reincarnation and astrology. This cathedral is a monument to the new order the Portuguese imposed, a symbol of the imperial church rising triumphant above the perceived darkness of Indian heresy. On the altarpiece, the angels wear Portuguese clothes, while St. Thomas is shown with European features, wearing the robes of a Catholic bishop. But despite burning all the existing copies of the Acts of Thomas, the Inquisition never completely succeeded in erasing the history of the Indian Christians. It's only when you poke around behind the altarpiece that you can see the older traditions the Portuguese had deliberately tried to cover up. For here, in the darkness, you can still find an image of St. Thomas, but with the dark skin and features of a man from the East. Kerala is crisscrossed by a network of lagoons, rivers and canals known as the backwaters. To see quite how far the St. Thomas Christians have managed to maintain their independence and their traditions, you have to travel inland, over the lakes and waterways, past a trail of shrines and churches that mark the way St. Thomas himself is supposed to have come. Still very much the deep south of India, hot and humid, somnambulant and brooding. The soil is so fertile that as you drift up the lotus-choked waterways, the trees close in around you and twisting tropical fan vaults of bamboo and banyan arch together in the wards of the forest canopy. Mango trees hang heavy over the fishermen's skiffs. All is still and green and fertile. It's here in the muggy jungles of the interior that the St. Thomas Christians held out most effectively against the Portuguese. After the burning of their libraries, they had to find a way to preserve their legends and the memories of their past. In songs and dances such as this, the Kalimagan Patu or Dance of Thomas, the story of how the apostle brought Christianity to India was kept alive, locked in a place that the Inquisition could never touch. The minds and memories of the Christians of the backwaters.
So here is a precious thing in which you might be interested in.
What is it?
This is palm leaf documents, very ancient, which contains the ancient songs of the Syrian Christians written.
Just what we saw now?
Yeah.
This is the text?
Yeah, part of the thing, yeah. Part of the thing. Here is Margangali text, there is the ancient songs.
Madhankali being the song of St. Thomas.
St. Thomas, yeah.
Which is the song of St. Thomas? Could you show us the text of that?
Yeah, this
is
here.
it? Look at it. But Father, I thought all this sort of thing, all the documentation was destroyed by the Portuguese.
But, this type of things survived.
How, in the oral tradition?
Oral tradition.
Passed on from father to son?
Son to son, yeah. Teachers to students, And then later, I think this might be of the 14th and the 15th century, they started writing this on this leaf of a coconut tree leaf.
And these are the oldest surviving documents of the St. Thomas Christians?
Documents of the St. Thomas Christians, these ancient songs.
It turned out that the father had another rather unexpected treat. A troupe of dancing nuns.
See, marginally is a male dance.
Okay.
And recently when we introduced it in Kerala for the youth festival, we introduced it also for women folk.
Okay.
Then later, we also introduced among the sisters who are neither male nor female.
Oh, that's not very polite, Father. They're very feminine nuns. So, Father, bring on the dancing nuns. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, having never seen nuns dance before, except, of course, for the odd pub strippogram. It wasn't Whoopi Goldberg, but then St. Thomas probably wasn't Rudolf Nureyev either. So, Father, isn't it a bit unusual to have nuns dancing?
Yeah, they don't generally dance,
They must get very hot feet on this hot surface, Father.
So it is easy for a dance, Fast they will move.
Well, they're very cruel to them. We left the sisters strutting their stuff and headed on upstream, until finally, at the end of the backwaters, we came to Kottayam, the St. Thomas Christians' capital. Although I knew it was nearly Christmas, the lulling effect of the backwaters had made me lose track of the date, and I found Kottayam in the midst of its Christmas celebrations.
Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, holy hosts sing hallelujah. Christ the Savior.
After all I'd seen, I went to bed as I used to as a child on Christmas Eve, scarcely able to wait for the morning. The church service here is like an extraordinary religious time capsule. To this day, the St. Thomas Christians follow the ancient liturgy of St. James, that once used by the early church in Jerusalem, which is still, in part, chanted in Aramaic, the language of both St. Thomas and Jesus himself. What I find even more remarkable is that many also celebrate the Passover meal, a Jewish practice undoubtedly followed by the very earliest disciples of Jesus. The bell staves being rung over the priests are to mimic the feel of angels' wings. The Christian presence makes the town feel quite unlike any other in India. For not only is Kottayam full of lay Christians, it is also packed with monasteries and seminaries, many of which claim to have been founded by the Apostle himself, and all of which are packed to bursting. And while the churches of Jerusalem and the West are slowly emptying, those in India are flourishing more than ever. So, Father, what would you say to cynical Western scholars who say that there's no evidence that St. Thomas ever came to India?
Well, I would say we are the evidence for the coming of St. Thomas to India, because we have a very long, unbroken tradition in the community which believes that St. Thomas was the founder of the church in India. And for us, that is the most important thing, and not something on paper or stone, which is secondary. We have a spirituality which is very close to the spirituality of the early church. We would say we are as old as any apostolic church anywhere in the world.
This ceremony is to commemorate the feeding of the 5,000, an event that St. Thomas himself would have witnessed. Yet while the original feeding of the 5,000 admitted everyone, some Christians are rigorously kept away from this celebration. For the converts to the St. Thomas churches retained many of their old Hindu traditions and never forgot their original caste. As I soon discovered, the untouchables, or Dalits as they now prefer to be called, are very much segregated away from the big church. So what do you teach at the...
I teach English.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Shakespeare?
It's Malayalam English.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the church.
Who worships here?
Yeah. The Dalits.
Exclusively the Dalits?
Exclusive for Dalits. And it was established 100 years ago by the upper caste Christians.
Not by the Dalits themselves?
No, no.
So this church was built as an alternative for the Dalits?
Yeah. Because the people who thought of setting up a congregation for the Dalits, they thought it better to have a separate congregation.
Was it done politely or offensively?
It was not the choice of the people. The people would rather worship together. They would like to have fellowship. They would like to have communion.
The Dalits would?
Yeah.
But the upper caste wouldn't have it?
No.
And how much of that survives today? I mean, what does it actually mean day to day to be a Dalit?
You are always made to feel your inferiority. You are made a slave of inferiority, a prisoner of this inferiority.
But how do people know you're a Dalit? I mean, you don't wear a badge saying I'm a Dalit.
So it's very, very clear, very obvious, and it's very easy for the people to ascertain your caste. The only question needed is where you come from, which place, which locality, and which congregation you belong to.
And immediately...
Because all the congregations are segregated.
When you read in history books that St. Thomas came to India and converted exclusively the upper castes, even the Brahmins, the priests, what do you think when you hear that?
Personally, I cannot subscribe to that belief or that lie. Because Christ, Jesus, he chose his disciples from the lowest, the fishermen, the fisherfolk, the ordinary people, the people on the margins. How can you believe that a disciple of Jesus came and chose disciples from the upper caste?
So it's an upper caste lie, it's misinformation?
Yeah, or disinformation.
Good. Thank you, sir. I went to see Arundhati Roy, the Booker Prize winner who was born here and is herself a St. Thomas Christian. She has strong views on caste.
In my book, most people say, how can you say that a Syrian Christian woman and a Paravan, who's untouchable, a Dalit, could have had a physical relationship? Because it's simply not possible. They are two different species. That's what they say. You know, it's unbelievable.
Since we've been here, we've talked to lots of St. Thomas Christian priests and bishops, and they've all said unanimously that caste isn't a problem and doesn't exist in the Christian community. Is that true?
I can't believe that they would say that. You know, it's just, there's no polite way of putting it, it's just complete crap. But I mean, in a strange way, it's encouraging that they even think that it's something to hide, because most people, you know, wouldn't deny it because they don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, to the extent where there are people who would not still, to date, allow a Dalit person into their kitchen or into their house.
A St. Thomas Christian wouldn't allow...
Oh, yeah. I mean, you'd find people that do, but equally you'd find plenty who wouldn't even consider it, you know. They'll say, I have had relatives who've told me, you know, they smell different and things like this. It's barbaric.
Talking to Arundhati and the professor made me realise how difficult it must have been for St. Thomas himself, trying to make converts in so complex and unchanging a country. This is the biggest Christian pilgrimage centre in Kerala. Every day, groups of pilgrims of every caste head up to the top of the hill called Malaya Tor. They carry wooden crosses and chant hymns to Punan Kurisu Muttapan, the old man of the cross, as they call St. Thomas. The reason they do so is that Thomas himself is said to have retreated up this mountain to hide from his Hindu enemies, who'd been alarmed at the growing success of his mission. He had now been in the country 20 years. As you rise up the hill, you can see the whole of Kerala laid out like a table before you. After St. Thomas climbed up here, he's said to have spent a month in prayer, preparing for what he knew would be his martyrdom. At the end of this month, he warned his followers that they would never see him again, but promised that he would watch over them forever. He looked out for the last time over the green fields of Kerala, then picked up his staff and set off eastwards across the mountains and even further into India. As an 18-year-old backpacker, fresh from school, this was one of the first parts of India that I ever travelled in. And it was here, I suppose, that I first really fell in love with this astonishing, maddening country. Sitting on the running board, looking out over these plains, I remembered that first trip, and the degree to which that first glimpse of India thrilled, excited, and daunted me. Since then I've lived here, on and off, for years, and it has never ceased to surprise me. For Thomas, though, it was a very different journey. He was travelling into what has always been the most orthodox area of Hindu India. For Tamil Nadu, so the Tamils will tell you, is a sacred landscape where Hinduism has been preserved in its purest form, untouched by the influence of Islam that has moulded its character in the north. Certainly, as St. Thomas headed eastwards, he encountered ever more resistance from the Hindu priestly caste, the Brahmins. Madras, the capital of southern India, is a relatively modern city, founded by the British in the late 17th century. But on its edge, now absorbed into the sprawl of the city, lies the far more ancient temple town of Mylapore, the city of peacocks, sacred to the great god Shiva and his son, Murugan. St. Thomas spent 4 years here, preaching to the people and debating with the Brahmins, who then as now administer the Mylapore temples. But ultimately, the refusal of Thomas to worship the Hindu gods made him enemies. After 4 years, the local Raja had had enough of this troublesome holy man, converting his subjects and irritating the Brahmins of his temples. So he ordered St. Thomas to be dragged from his cave. Then, as the Acts of Thomas puts it, he took Thomas and went without the city, and there came with him a few soldiers with weapons. He said to the soldiers, "Go up on this mountain and stab him." And when he had ascended the mountain, St. Thomas went to pray, saying thus, "My Lord and my God, my guide in all the lands through which I have travelled, guide me now that I may come unto thee." Then the soldiers came and struck him all together, and he fell down and died. In his life, St. Thomas had travelled thousands of miles, but it was after his death that the saint, a carpenter from Roman Palestine, made the strangest journey of all, into the Hindu pantheon. On the face of it, Hinduism, with its thousands of deities, might seem to be an impossibly different religion to Christianity. But what is surprising is that in the centuries after Thomas's death, Christians did visit Hindu temples, and members of the two faiths did successfully live side by side, mingling their beliefs. In many places, Christian images, including those of St. Thomas, were carried in temple processions next to idols of Shiva and Murugan riding on his peacock. It was against this background that Thomas was slowly absorbed into Hindu cosmology, in the somewhat surprising form of the sacred bird of Mylapore. The story of the travels of the apostle was mingled with Hindu myths, so that St. Thomas was later understood to have met his end while hiding from his enemies in the form of a peacock. Eventually, prompted by a demon, a lower caste huntsman shot and killed him. The myths of the two traditions became so closely intertwined that the audience, depending on their faith, could understand this dance as telling either the death of Murugan or the martyrdom of St. Thomas. It is an extraordinary example of the ability India has always had of absorbing and transforming all the influences that come to it. It's only recently that the close relationship between Hinduism and Christianity has begun to be threatened by vicious attacks on Christians by militant Hindu fundamentalists. But despite such reverses, Christianity survives here, as does the cult of St. Thomas. Hindus and Christians both still come here to pray to the saint for their most profound hopes and desires. At the end of my journey, I climbed to the top of the hill outside Madras, still known as St. Thomas's Mount. This ancient chapel was built on the site of an even older monastery, marking the place of the saint's martyrdom and visited by Marco Polo. It's a quiet and peaceful place, sanctified by the prayers of generations of pilgrims. In its very smallness, as well as its incredible antiquity, this chapel is an oddly appropriate memorial to St. Thomas. For while Christianity has never been a major faith in India, it is a religion with incredibly deep roots in the soil, and one which has clung on with remarkable tenacity despite the odds. Above all, the church here has remained faithful to the tradition of St. Thomas's incredible journey from Palestine to southern India, a story long forgotten in a West which has come to regard itself as the home of Christianity, forgetting that Christianity is in its essence not a Western, but an Eastern religion. Sitting in the tiny chapel, it seemed a long way from the start of my journey in the deserts of the Holy Land, where St. Thomas had grown up and where I had stumbled on his story in the pages of the Acts. I couldn't help thinking that for a man who was famous for having been a doubter, it showed a quite extraordinary leap of faith to have travelled quite so far with the seeds of a new religion, and finally, to have given up his life for his beliefs.